Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving into a really quite thought-provoking excerpt. It's from a chapter in a source we have here.
Hmm.
We can maybe call it The Mind's Vessel, just for this deep dive. The actual title isn't the main thing right now.
Right.
What is the main thing is how it kind of challenges our most basic ideas about, well, who we are.
Yeah, it really does.
So our mission today is to really grapple with this viewpoint, you know, this idea about identity, maybe being separate from your physical body, and what this text argues is the true nature of I.
And it doesn't exactly ease you in, does it? This chapter, it sort of immediately confronts you with a pretty striking thought experiment.
It really does.
Yeah.
It asks you to imagine just for a second pulling apart all your organs, laying them out on a table right in front of you.
It's such a vivid image, maybe even a bit unsettling, which I think is precisely the point the author's trying to make.
Yeah.
Because right after that, the text follows up. It asks you to look at these individual body parts. Your heart, your breath even, your liver, kidneys, bones, blood, legs, fingers, hair, even your brain.
And the core argument it's making is this. When you actually look at these pieces, you see them objectively. You wouldn't point to your liver sitting there on the table and think, ah, that is me.
No.
You'd think, that's my liver.
Yeah.
You see them as belonging to you, as yours, not as you.
Exactly. According to this perspective, these things, they aren't I. They're described more as just parts, right? Compilations of cells. They are, in essence, mostly removable, potentially replaceable, and definitely temporary constructs. Things you possess, maybe, but not the essence of who you fundamentally are.
And this is where the mind's vessel, as we're calling it, gets really interesting, I think. It draws this really sharp contrast. So while your limbs and organs are seen as objective as mine, the feeling of I, that kind of core sense of self, it's described very differently.
Yeah, it calls it a concentration of energy, a sort of heavy presentness.
Right, and this feeling, this I, it isn't felt like evenly throughout the body, is it?
No, the source suggests it's primarily located maybe in the chest, the throat, perhaps a little in the head.
You don't really feel your consciousness in your toes, do you?
Bro.
Or feel sadness radiating from your elbow.
Huh. No, not usually. The core is presented as the seat of this I, and where those deep feelings actually reside.
Okay, so think about that space then, that chest, throat, head zone. It definitely contains organs you'd label mine.
Sure. Heart, lungs, brain.
But it also seems to contain this energy, this presence that the source is calling I.
Which leads directly to the text's really crucial question.
Yeah.
What happens if you separate that feeling of I, that energy, that presentness, from the physical form?
Yeah.
What actually exists when that I isn't there? What's left of the vessel?
Wow. That's a fundamental challenge to how we usually think about ourselves, certainly in the West.
Totally. And the source doesn't just leave it as a theoretical thing. It asks you directly. Have you ever really sat with this? Have you felt each body part one by one and genuinely recognize this is not I? Can you identify, maybe right now, the difference between what you call yours, like your hand, your kidney, and what you call yourself, that feeling of presence?
That distinction feels like the real starting point here. Because the chapter then takes a bit of a turn, doesn't it? It explores how we typically do define ourselves.
Right. It acknowledges that trying to put words and meanings around who you are, based on your likes, your values, what you want, it feels necessary. It gives you direction, a sense of identity.
Sure, it makes sense.
But the source argues in doing that, you inevitably create attachments to those definitions.
Oh, okay.
Attachments. And these attachments, according to this text, they become a bit problematic. They drive us to constantly strive, to keep ourselves within these predefined boxes. I am a person who likes X, values Y, wants Z.
Right. Stay consistent with the definition.
Exactly. And the core insight here, from this source's viewpoint, is that out of this constant effort to uphold a fixed idea of self, you inevitably set yourself up for failure and suffering when reality doesn't perfectly match that definition.
So the basic problem being highlighted is this belief that a static, word-based idea, like a label, can possibly represent a dynamic, constantly evolving being that just doesn't track, does it?
It seems unlikely when you put it like that.
And the text suggests that the ways you inevitably fail to live up to these fixed mental concepts of you, that's where your biggest grievances come from.
Think about that for a second. Your complaints aren't really stemming from what happens, but from how what happens contradicts this fixed picture you have of who you think you should be.
That's quite a perspective.
It is. And what's fascinating here is the source's observation that we often get attached to the structures rather than the contents.
Structures versus contents. What does that mean exactly in this context?
Okay, so instead of focusing on the content, like who you actually are moment to moment, the actual work you do day to day, the feeling of love right now,
Uh-huh. The living experience.
right, we cling to the structure, how you think you're perceived by others, the job title, the idea of forever love, rather than the loving itself. It suggests we're sometimes more comfortable with the label, the container, than the messy, living thing inside.
It's like, yeah, preferring the map over the actual territory.
Good analogy. And the source suggests maybe we do this because clinging to fixed ideas of what things are like, thinking of yourself purely as a body, just this physical thing, it feels safer somehow.
Yeah, maybe less ambiguous.
It avoids that open-ended, maybe slightly scary question of, well, what else might be there beyond the physical, beyond the label?
Right. But this raises a really important question, which the text then pivots to, doesn't it?
It does. What else? What if it isn't some empty void or, an endpoint? What if it's actually a beginning, a completely different way of being?
Okay, so the source proposes this as an alternative way to see things.
Exactly. And it explores the, frankly, radical potential of shifting your awareness towards this what else?
So what if simply being conscious of that difference, the parts that are clearly mine, versus the I that feels like presence, what if that alone could actually free you from a lot of stuff?
Yeah, like quell those incessant thoughts, the ones driven by trying to maintain that fixed self-definition. Maybe even the text hints balm physical aches.
Interesting connection to the physical there.
Well, it ties directly into the source's perspective on healing, which is quite distinct.
How so?
It's not presented as, say, fixing a bad attitude or changing an opinion you have about yourself or, altering your appearance.
Okay, not surface level changes.
Oh, according to the mind's vessel, true healing is about shifting your fundamental presence, your awareness, your basic energy. It's deeper than thoughts or looks.
Which brings us, I suppose, to the really clear, powerful conclusion presented in this chapter.
Yeah, it states it pretty plainly. Fixing the parts, whether that's the body or the mental ideas about the self, that doesn't actually heal the whole.
Right.
The only thing, it argues, that fundamentally changes you and your whole experience of life is cultivating this awareness of the parts that are not I.
Wow. So that awareness itself, the source claims that is the whole.
Sort of, yeah. It's not something new you gain or achieve through effort. It's presented more as where you ultimately reside anyway, maybe where you began before all the labels.
Like uncovering something already there.
Exactly. It's that spark of recognition, that awareness, that allows you to step back and question the physical bits and the mental constructs you previously identified with so strongly, recognizing them as the vessel, perhaps, but not the core I.
And crucially, this chapter doesn't just leave you with these, abstract theories.
No, it ends with the direct invitation.
Which is?
Don't just think about these ideas. Try to feel them.
Yeah.
Experience the distinction.
Okay. So, reflecting on this deep dive then, we've journeyed from essentially dissecting the physical body, seeing it as separate parts.
The mind versus the I.
Right. Then through challenging our usual definitions of identity and seeing how the attachments to those definitions can cause suffering.
Yeah, the striving against a fixed idea.
And finally exploring the source's quite radical idea of this what else, this core awareness and its potential for healing, not by fixing parts, but just through awareness itself.
It's definitely a perspective that, it really upends a lot of conventional ways we think about identity and healing and the self. By drawing such a stark line between the physical vessel and that core sense of presence or I.
Absolutely. And as you, listening, absorb this very different viewpoint on something as fundamental as who you believe yourself to be, let's maybe just sit with the source's final prompt for a moment.
That final challenge, yeah. If this perspective holds water, even partially, if awareness of the parts that are not I really is the key to shifting everything.
Then what happens when you actively try, right now maybe, to feel that difference, that distinction between what you call yours, your body parts, your thoughts, your history, all that stuff.
And what you call yourself, that perhaps quieter, central feeling of just presence, being.
Yeah. What does that feeling, or maybe even the lack of a distinct feeling there, what does that tell you about the nature of I?